My name is Karen Hill. I'm in St. John, New Brunswick. Today is the 17th of February, 1984. I'm at the home of Mrs. Vilma Kurol, who has had long experience with social work in New Brunswick. This is the Oral History of Social Work in Canada project, a project of the Canadian Association of Social Workers. Mrs. Kurol, in order to begin, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your early life.
I was raised and educated in Estonia, Europe. I finished the School of Social Work in 1941. This was a 3-year course. I worked for 3 years in Estonia. Then I worked 1 year in Austria with the refugees, helping them to resettle in different countries. And then I came in 1953 in Canada and has been working here for 30 years.
Could we talk for a minute about your social work education? I'd be interested to know what kinds of courses you were taking and that sort of thing. Do you have any recollection of, were you doing a lot of casework courses, or were you policy and research? What kinds of it?
It's been a long time since I have submitted all my courses and their length and variations to the Canadian Association of Social Workers. I believe it was 1956. As a result of this, I was accepted by the Canadian Association of Social Workers. It was a 3 years course. I was a 4th year graduate, and this school did no longer exist after, I believe, 1944.
Mm-hmm. Did you have to do field placements?
Yes, we had 6 months field placements in a different places. Mental health was, for instance, 1 month. Social service, social assistance department, 1 month. There was children's institutions. There were infants institutions, plus some write-ups and about the various daycare centers, transient homes, Salvation Army projects, etc.
There was a very well-developed social welfare system in Estonia at that time then.
I believe so. We were very fortunate to have this kind of school in Estonia, which was really established by the Women's League. It started, initiative came from the Women's League.
Mm-hmm.
Professors were all local people, but they had themselves training in other countries. I remember 2 who had training in social work themselves in other countries, one in Switzerland and one in America. I believe it was Chicago. This lady is still living, 85, in Sweden, and I'm corresponding with her at the present time.
Mm-hmm.
A lady who gave us lectures about early child development. She was educated herself in America.
Mm-hmm.
2 or 3 were lawyers, but they had their other courses taken in different countries. One professor was had Sorbonne University education herself, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
At times it was a little bit like a hodgepodge. Every professor brought their own trend with them, and sometimes it was a little bit conflicting. American approach was different from the Swiss approach, and the French approach was again different from the Estonian approach.
So you must have come out of there with a what we would call today a broad-based education.
We were exposed to different ideas. This is always good when you are a member of the small nation. In that sense, it's not good to be a member of a small nation in a political or other sense. When you are a member of a small nation, you are inclined to learn what other big nations do, how they handle problems, what their approach is, what their legislation is, and then you apply the principles or the methods to your own setting. And when you are a member of the small nation, you yourself are interested to know what the big leading cultures are all about in this world, what their social structures and cultural structures are, and where you fit in, and what benefits you can get from their literature culture to add to your own.
You mentioned that you after you finished your courses at the School of Social Work in, was it 1941 that you said?
41.
1941. You began work immediately after that.
Yes.
Were you doing social work then?
Yes, I did the child and family work at the social service department in Tallinn. I was on the staff and Minister for Social Services, but I was assigned to work at Tallinn. That was a principle that social workers should not be the municipal employees, because they would have a more authority and more neutrality to speak out on the issues and demand services, or have a more neutral standing.
So you were not a municipal employee then. Who was it that you worked for?
Minister for Social Services.
Would that
But we are assigned to work with the different municipalities throughout the country.
So if I understand that right, then that would be the equivalent of working for a national government, but being assigned
Yes.
to a province or a city.
Yeah.
I see.
The principle is, if you are an employee of the municipality, then your relationship is more ticklish or dependent on your employer. We are still accountable in our daily decisions and daily work to immediate supervisor, but just to initiate programs and have a more so-called backbone to stand up. I think that's why it was one of the principles that we are all employed by the Minister of Social Services. It could have been at that time also the budgetary, issue. I wouldn't know about that. But we are proud in our. Word proud is not correct. We were really happy that it was this way, because especially during the war and our work, there was quickly programs needed, quickly different approaches needed, and we were able to speak more firmly and convincingly that we needed this.
A question occurs to me. I'll ask it, and of course, whether or not you answer it is up to you, but your training in the School of Social Work, did that take place when there was not war?
Yes, it took place during the peacetime.
So your learning situation would have been in that, and you were quickly thrown into a war situation. And you mentioned a change in the way that things had to be done. How does a social worker cope in that situation when you have ingrained principles and things that you've learned, and yet emergencies begin happening?
You still have your principles. The principles are to help the people. But you need sometimes different approach altogether and quick approach. Usually through the channels, regular channels, the changes come slow. But when you are faced with a situation in a crisis like war situation, you have to make a quick decision. And for instance, what we needed in my particular district, we needed quickly more daycare centers, 24-hour daycare centers, because there was a lot of women who lost their husbands through mobilizations, through other things, and they had to become self-supporting. They had small children. We needed a 24-hour daycare center in order to enable them to become self-supporting due to the circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And then you pack your feet, go to your municipality and explain in firm terms. This is quickly needed. Then you have to go to another authority and to get the house or the property where you establish your daycare center, and then you start to get prepare the budget and have to get quickly the staff and then establish the facility for the people, what's needed. That is just one example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. At that time, were churches and community organizations, as we know them today, we call them voluntary organizations today, charitable organizations, perhaps is the best word. Were they at all involved in this rapid response to new needs?
They are helpful, but again, that they couldn't respond as fast as the situation demanded. They were always helpful, really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you were in that work of child and family services for a while, and then went to do some other kind of work with refugees, did you say?
Yes, due to circumstances, I had to live 3 years in Austria, and I got employment for over a year with a French military government who just happened to occupy this part of Austria. And I was in the Baltic section doing the social work with people who wanted to resettle in other countries. And there were some housing problems. There is like everyday living problems, clothing problems and things, employment and things like that. But mainly was resettling the refugees and helping them with resettling issues.
What does a social worker do in that situation?
All ethnic groups formed a big committee, and on this committee basis, they try to get the other countries interested. Briefs were sent and look out, where the people can go. Information was obtained. For instance, how many people, what kind of immigrants England needs at this part. What is the possibilities of Argentina or Brasilia or France or somewhere else? And information was obtained, and each ethnic group was given this information and interpreted to them. And then people are advised accordingly. And like, for instance, American Commission came there, and they themselves sought the immigrants. English Commission came, and Canadian government opened their doors to immigrants.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But my job was mainly if the family wanted to go, for instance, England. I got information about England as much as possible. What is the possibilities there? Where is employment? How is the housing? What is there? Other things, social legislation and whatnot. And just we sat together and discussed, is this really the best for you? For instance, if somebody was a farmer, all their life has been a farmer, nothing else, then maybe it was not for this particular family best to go to England, where the farming possibility would not be as great as some other country. And some governments stated they need X number of tradesmen, and then we presented this to our own ethnic groups, their request, and people made up their mind which country they like to go to.
Mm-hmm.
The language, knowledge of a language, your climatic conditions, and sort of race is important too in selecting one's new adopted country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that was a somewhat different kind of social work than what you had been doing just before.
But it was very interesting. And the immigrants from the after the first Russian Revolution, the 1818 revolution, they were really most helpful, I remember, from these committee meetings. Because they have had almost so many years experience themselves traveling in Europe from one country to another, and they're just wise old people.
So these people who had been through the first revolution left, and they were in Austria at the.
Yes.
So they were sort of senior advisors then.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
And it was really very, very helpful to this new group, because we were all ourselves thrown into this new role ourselves, and we didn't have that much experience. It was, new to us, but they have been through, and they've been older too, 20 years older.
Mm-hmm.
Or more than 20, actually, 25 years older. So this all adds together, their experience plus their age too.
Yeah. Were there any international groups that are involved in this resettlement? I don't know how active the Red Cross was at that time, or the United Nations Refugee Relief Agency, I believe it was called. Did you have that kind of contact?
I didn't, but they were probably very active when there was camps. I dealt with people who did not live in the camps, who were independently living.
Mm-hmm.
But I surmise that these groups were helping very much people, with all kinds of problems who were living in the camps. Mm-hmm. Because the camps were supported, the UNRWA, mm-hmm. UNRWA camps. Mm-hmm. I imagine they were supported by American funds at that time. Mm-hmm. And these different groups were probably very active there, so mm-hmm. I heard from somebody else, but I was not involved myself.
Did you have much contact with other social workers during that time you were doing the refugee work?
I don't think there is anybody in this group who was professional social worker.
Mm-hmm.
But there are from other ethnic groups were people who are really concerned about the people.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they wouldn't be members of the group.
So there was a combination then of goodwill and your professional training.
Yeah, but there are other people were professions, but not professions in social work. There were professional engineer. One was, another one was sort of military man. Third one was something else. They're all professional people in a sense, but not in the sense of social work.
I see. What happened when that job was over?
When this job is over, I migrated myself to England.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I needed a place for myself to move.
Yes.
After moving everybody else, or helping to move.
Yes.
And I got myself a position in a mental hospital as a student nurse. Worked from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. 6 days a day, 6 days a week.
Oh my.
And that was very interesting because I saw the human nature from a different point of view altogether.
Mm-hmm. Was this at a time where there were still military casualties coming in, or were you dealing with veterans?
No, it was just a regular mental hospital in southern part of England. Mm-hmm. Very large hospital, really.
Mm-hmm.
But nearby was a hospital mainly for plastic surgery where all the military casualties have come, or war casualties came in with, and who needed really a top-notch plastic surgery, and they received that in that hospital.
Mm-hmm. Did you have contact with that hospital then through your?
Not formally, but informally I knew a couple of physiotherapists, and I visited on my off-duty days some people, and I'm still corresponding with English teacher who lost her leg and needed plastic surgery, and we formed a relationship that has lasted now 30 years.
It's marvelous.
I was visiting her as a cheering her up again, my little social work role when somebody's sick. And she cheered me up too because she had excellent sense of humor.
That was at that time when you were a student nurse?
Yes, and I was depressed too at times myself.
Yes. Being in another country must have been trying.
There was 25 different nationalities working in this hospital.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, that was interesting too in that sense. You meet a lot of young girls. They were about my age or a little bit younger or older. And that was just a very interesting experience.
Mm-hmm. Was there a social work department at that hospital?
Yes, it was. But they didn't accept my qualifications. I was not English educated. And there is, in England, is the citizenship law too. You have to be citizen before you can start to practice your social work.
Mm-hmm.
And I just at that time I wasn't so much interested in my professional career. I just wanted to see the England, be in England, and I to start my family and things like that for my personal use.
Mm-hmm. You had gotten married in that time?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. How long did you stay as a student nurse?
2 years.
And then did you begin working as a nurse after that?
No, I left the services and start a great family.
Oh, so you were out
Yeah.
of the workforce for a while. During that time that you were out of the workforce, did you have contact with the social work profession at all?
No, I didn't. I understood at that time the professional social workers in England were mainly working in clinics, psychiatric clinics and medical, and there are not that many in general child and family social services. Their system is a little bit different too. I saw myself one child protection case handled in the neighborhood where I lived. There was one situation. But it was different from from our model. It's different.
When did you return to the social work workforce?
When I came to St. John, that was 1953.
And how did you get your first social work job, and what was it?
I was about a couple of weeks in St. John when I started to look around what institutions are here and which agencies are here. And I thought I better start make inquiries at the social assistance office, because I felt as just to get climatized, it would be easier for me to start in the social assistance office. I made about 10 inquiries and nobody knew where a social welfare or social assistance or social services or office was. Nobody knew. At that time I didn't know myself, and it was called Relief Office, and only one person ran the program. She was known in the city by the name, not by the office.
Who was that?
That was Mrs. Trips, and she was a relief officer in the municipality. But I went to the unemployment office, and Miss Foster, who was the head of the women's section, she just took interest in me and started to find, where she could locate me for employment. She made one call, and there was apparently opening, and suddenly she asked my religion. So I mentioned my religion, but I was of the wrong religion for this office. And so I learned very fast that politics and religion are very important in New Brunswick.
And was that employment for a social agency where religion was?
Apparently so. Apparently so.
So what happened then?
Then she contacted somebody else. She contacted the Children's Aid Society and was informed that they would have a vacancy. And in a month's time, some employee was marrying a lawyer in Ontario and moving out. And this lady set the appointment date for me. And it was a month later I was in a job.
Could you describe your first job with the CAS and what you were doing and who your clients were?
I was employed as a child protection worker. And my clients were what I call it chronic multi-problem families. And I dealt also with other short-term problems, mainly investigations for divorce courts. The request came from Ontario when the people were getting divorced and the custody of the children was questioned and evaluated. This party who was living here in St. John, another party might live probably in Ontario, family allowance investigations, and but main bulk caseload was a chronic multi-problem.
Okay.
You can cut some, you know.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll edit.
Yeah.
We'll edit out some, but we never know until we talk what's coming and what's to be edited. So, you mentioned doing investigations for family allowances. Is that for the federal family allowance program?
Yes. Yes, it was. These are the children have been institutionalized, and who maintains, and how long they've been out of parental care, and all this kind of things.
I see. How did kids get to be wards of the Children's Aid Society in those days? For what kinds of reasons?
The same as nowadays. I don't see any difference. The definition of neglect remains still the same.
Were you getting kids into care because of things like truancy and the poverty of their parents? Did that ever occur?
I happened to work under Mrs. Mary Bishop leadership. She was a qualified social worker. She was experienced, and I was really fortunate to have such a good directress. She was a very strong believer, as myself, who have been seeking to live in a democratic country, that no child should come into care ever for poverty alone. And although the social assistance program is really so much much more inadequate that is nowadays, we did everything possible to help the family to maintain the children in home with them.
What was the social assistance program like? You mentioned Miss Cliffs and the relief.
TRIFs. That was a rate set by municipality. Mrs. Cliffs didn't set the rates. A council or municipality set the rates. At that time was probably the maximum was, and if I remember correctly, was $10 per week per family, regardless of the size of the family sometimes, you know. And no rent was paid, no fuel is paid. The private agencies, churches, especially churches, really carried a lot of responsibility in maintaining the family together.
Did you have mother's allowances in New Brunswick then?
Yes, there was mother's allowance program.
And how did that relate?
There was a mother's allowance was administered by the province, and there was a mother's allowance inspector, or whatever the title was, who did administrate the program. Mother's allowance program did not come under the municipal program or under Children's Aid. Unless there was a child neglect involved, then we got involved, but otherwise not. But in mother's allowance at that time, sometimes the mothers who produced children after, when they're single, and they couldn't get the additional amount for this so-called illegitimate child. So sometimes they had to adopt their own children to legitimize them in order to get the extra benefits for this extra child.
And in that case, the Children's Aid Society would become involved because of the adoption?
No. I mean, in that sense, but yes, but it was only in a technical sense.
What other agencies existed in the community at that time?
The Catholic Welfare Bureau, who dealt mainly with the Catholic families. They had the foster home program. They had the Institution for Children program. Then there was family services for Protestant families. They didn't have no institutions under their program, to the best of my knowledge, but they did a lot of counseling and giving monetary help. These are the two main agencies who helped. But the churches were really the help givers financially. Food, Salvation Army, a very powerful organization, Salvation Army, was helpful. And it still is, you know, in every crisis situation now too. They had the Unmarried Mothers Program, an institution. Then there was also the New Brunswick Protestant Orphanage Home, who boarded children. They did the adoption program, so did the Catholic Welfare Bureau adoption program, infants, adoptable children. And the New Brunswick Protestant Orphanage Home boarded children up to, I believe, 16 years of age, or 14, I just don't remember now.
When you say they boarded children, did they keep the children in a central institution?
Yes. Families who could not, for various reasons, have the children with them, they boarded them. But they also had the adoption program. The unmarried mothers could release their children for adoption through a Protestant orphanage home.
And the CAS was not involved in that adoption process then?
Except that the Children's Aid Society had to do all the adoption investigations.
So you were involved, the agency then was involved to a certain extent?
The approval had to come from the Children's Aid Society, or recommendation. The final approval is done by the court when the court grants the orders, but the recommendation for adoption had to come through the Children's Aid Society.
Did you have the situation in New Brunswick that existed in some other provinces where New Brunswick children would be adopted by people out of the province or out of the country?
I was not involved with the adoption program, but I have a feeling that it was probably taking place in some cases when the children relatives came from other provinces for adoption. But I just don't know on what happened on a provincial basis. We placed, in our area, we placed to another area children, sibling groups sometimes, or child with special needs when we couldn't find a home within our own area. We placed, but I don't ever remember that we placed in St. John outside the country during the Children's Aid Society. I didn't hear about that. But the girls came here from other provinces who gave the children up, infants up for adoption.
The women would come here to a larger center?
Yeah. From other provinces, because to keep the matter confidential.
Yes. Did you have private maternity homes here during that time that you're aware of?
Salvation Army had a maternity home.
You didn't have private for-profit homes?
Not private that I know of. But the people stayed in the private homes, sometimes the expected mothers. And I surmise some were probably helped through the public funds, to keep themselves for a time being.
What other social workers were in town at the time that you came here in 1953?
Oh, there's quite a group of social workers here. And we met provincially. You mean professional social workers? We met provincially about 6 times a year, and these are very memorable meetings, very pleasant meetings for me.
Mm-hmm.
We used mostly Saturdays for the meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Went with a carload from St. John to Moncton or Fredericton or wherever the meeting was called. And we had a good agendas, and it was very, very satisfying for me to meet others from different field of work.
Mm-hmm.
Mental health, or a lot of workers are in mental health, and we got always up-to-date reports what happens on a national level, because we had a very good representation there, and the person was so enthusiastic and brought all the reports back, so we were always tuned in what happens in the rest of Canada.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What kinds of things was the association involved in at that time? Do you have a recollection?
It's been so long time. Very our professional standards, our own status, and whatever national issues were, we were always asked to make some comments.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are issues also when the province took over all social work. Children's Aid Society work took over in the 1st of January 1967. Before that, we had the discussions, about that, if we become more provincial employees, and the salary issues and all this kind of who's going to represent us, and things like that.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you more about that in a few minutes with some more questions about the provincial and national association. I wanted to ask you a couple more questions about your caseload and some of the issues that were important at the time. You mentioned earlier that the issue of religion was an important one in St. John. Was the division of population between French language and English important?
Not at that time, but religion was important because clients were helped through various churches and various organizations according to their religion. If the Catholic child needed a foster home for temporary boarding, Children's Aid Society did not provide at that time the boarding facility for social reasons. It had to be neglected before you take the child and board them.
Mm-hmm.
But for temporary boarding, if temporary boarding facility was needed, then either the Catholic Welfare Bureau was asked to meet this need, or the Protestant orphanage home. These were two. That's why the religion was important.
Mm-hmm. And was the language issue important?
At that time, I didn't run into any situation that I couldn't communicate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't speak French.
What about the St. John? I know is a large city as far as large geographic area. Were there special problems relating to people who lived in the more rural areas of St. John?
Among my clients as a protection worker, I found that the housing was really much poorer in outside lying areas than in the city. We had sort of two poor housing areas in the city north end and east end. They are now all torn down. You wouldn't recognize this city anymore from 1950s. But in the rural area, they the housing was really fire hazardous much more, and cold, not insulated, water wasn't in the house, and there were some very drastic cases, really. Very drastic cases had to be referred to the provincial fire marshal, because you couldn't leave the human beings, like somebody living in a tent, army tent, in the middle of January with a child of 14 and 4, an infant in the woods. I mean, this was one of the drastic situations.
And you were involved in that kind of thing?
Yes, yeah. Or I was called on Sunday morning. One Sunday morning, a baby landed in the hospital who was frozen, and they were 2 hours, and they got the baby, living again, and asked what to do with the baby, could be returned. And I went out around 10, 11 o'clock, and I see the sun through the boards. I mean, it was extremely cold night, and the fire has gone out, and everybody has fallen asleep, and the baby had almost half frozen.
Yeah.
This was really desperate housing situation.
What could one do about that situation? A social worker comes into a community and sees much housing that is inadequate, and yet you have a caseload to deal with. You have individual children to deal with.
I think it's a joint effort. It should be, all the concerned people and concerned parties who have authority and responsibility to discuss the issue and to find some solution to the issue.
Did that happen?
It happened one time here, yes. Through United Fund, they called a meeting. Different representatives were there from different agencies, and about, if I remember correctly, about 10 families are relocated to better housing.
So there was a way to get something done about that.
Yeah.
How long did you stay in that first job that you had with the CAS?
I stayed with the Journalist Society until the province took over in 1967. But in the meantime, my job changed there too. I became in charge of intake and protection unit, but I still was involved with the protection and intake and night duty and whatnot.
How was that job different from what you'd been doing before?
No, no different. Only the coordination of the work more. Before that, when you have your own caseload, you're involved with your own. But when you have a coordinate 4 people, and that's and give them guidelines too, how to handle or help them to discuss the situation, how to help people.
Had you had training in supervision of other people?
We got through school some, but it wasn't that much. In those days it was heavily, concentrated on casework, more or less. Administration came into it. But throughout the years, I've taken courses. I've been in Toronto University for 1 week in summertime, and I've been 1 week in normalization course taken, and I've taken the business administration courses. All throughout the years, there have been always courses here and there and I have trained others too, so it's a two-way street. You learn yourself too on the job.
Sure.
And but our department, provincial department, has been very much emphasizing the in-service and upgrading courses. even through once a year, we always had opportunity to attend in during the Children's Aid Society days in Frediton, 2-3 day courses or whatever the course was given on different topics. We had some nationally known agency heads to address us. Muriel McRae from Montreal Agency was here. David Weiss was in New Brunswick, giving us several days talk on the child protection field. And wherever opportunities presented, we have been allowed to go to outside conferences. So I feel that the New Brunswick has done really a lot to educate their staff, and several young people have had opportunity to go to school to become professionals through bursary and whatnot system.
Yeah.
So I think New Brunswick has been very much concerned about raising the standards, education standards of the staff.
You mentioned that the provincial government took over social services and children's aid societies in the mid-60s. What happened to lead up to that?
Mr. Louis Rabisho, who is now senator, became the leader here in the New Brunswick, and he, through his government, they wanted to revise the different areas, education and health, and to reorganize it. So they assumed the provincial responsibility for this area of work. Justice, health, education, welfare. I think there were 4 areas. That's a program of equal opportunity, I believe, was called at that time.
Leading up to that, New Brunswick had been the subject of some studies from people from Canadian Welfare Council and other places. And I guess the child welfare system had been pretty strongly criticized. Were you aware of that criticism?
When, at that time?
Well, from, I understand, the mid-20s until the late 40s. I think
I read the Cell report. Is there the Cell report? That was my...
I don't know that one.
Yes, I read that one. I can't just recall now which. I have read a couple of studies. No, I forgot now the name. George, somebody made a study. I read that one, and I think it's good to have the studies done, and then you take a look at yourself and to make the necessary changes.
Were those studies and those reports something that you, as a frontline worker, had been aware of?
It was probably mentioned in staff meetings, but we are not given copies to read, so to speak.
No.
Yeah.
So when that government takeover came about, how did that change your work?
Oh, it didn't change immediately. We became child welfare department, and then we did a little bit of internal changes, but it didn't come. But then a few years later it came about when they made a region. They divided province into the regions, and then each province got the regional director appointed, and then the regional director started to study own region and what is the system they want to, use. And we became here in St. John the Region 2 consisting of St. John, Kings, and Charlotte County. And then the regional director decided to amalgamate the social assistance program under one leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
What did he or she amalgamate with social assistance?
Social assistance and child welfare were two separate programs, but they amalgamate them, and then it's and revise the child welfare, and revise also the not the rate-wise, but internal system-wise, the social assistance, the rates and the procedures and the regulations came from, the head office, central.
Mm-hmm.
But how to apply that to the region and your own internal system.
Mm-hmm.
Then child welfare was also revised. I became the supervisor of area adoption and permanent wards.
Mm-hmm.
I had to go every 2 weeks to Sussex, St. Stephen, our two sub-offices, and review the child care and adoption matters with the workers there, and plan, and for every child permanency planning started to be emphasized, and more aggressive approach to adoption program.
Mm-hmm.
By this time we had quite a lot of older children in care, and we started really to very actively seek adoption homes for them.
Mm-hmm.
And we were quite successful, raising a lot of older children, sibling groups, and children with special needs over a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
I surmise the number probably runs into some 300.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a really very active period from 71 up to now my retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that we did our best as a team
Mm-hmm.
for the children for whom we had assumed responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I wonder if that's a place where we could stop for a few minutes. Should we take a break?
Okay, would you like a cup of coffee?
It's Vilma Kurol in St. John, New Brunswick today. Mrs. Kurol, in 1971, you took on new responsibilities regarding adoptions and the long-term care of children. Could you talk about what happened, what changes you saw in adoptions and care of children over those years?
The major emphasis is placed on the permanency planning for every child in care. Concentration or priority was given on the older children, sibling groups, or children with special needs, and older child who has not been placed for adoption. We went quite actively to achieve this objective. We started to advertise children in the paper. We got in touch with other regions in our area, and we had the adoption coordinator appointed in a provincial basis, and through coordinated efforts we located several suitable adoption homes for the children, free for adoption, and proceeded with the placements.
Mm-hmm. How was it that you were dealing with more older children?
Because there are so many on the caseload, so the child has remained in our care in the foster homes, and we took, we just started actively to make permanency planning for children. And among the adoptive parents, many foster homes who have been foster parents for several years became adopted parents through this initiative and through this active approach.
Mm-hmm. Were you experiencing here younger and younger mothers keeping their children for a while and then seeking to adopt the children out?
Yes, there were some cases that came through the child protection services that we received children 4, 3.5, or in this, or preschoolers in care, because unmarried mothers have tried to, or single parent have tried to cope with a child or children, and finally realized that parenting was not met adequately by them, and the children became available and free for adoption.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But all children placed for adoption were permanent wards of the province of New Brunswick, and most of them had the parental consents too, but some were placed without parental consents. And later on, from 74 on, a new legislation came in that if the parents have not signed a parental consent for adoption, then we had another court to go to, next instance, and request that the children be legally freed for adoption by the court.
Mm-hmm.
The time limit was 1 year. If we couldn't place them within a year, then if we needed to place them, then we had to go back to court. But we mostly found the homes, within 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
That was called divestment order by the higher court.
Divestment.
Divestment order.
Yeah.
The parent was divested completely for this certain period of time from their parental rights.
Mm-hmm.
Some parents were able to sign the adoption consents, but some just for emotional reasons or whatever reason just don't want to sign their flesh and blood away, as they said, and just couldn't bring themselves to this point that they could free the child for adoption.
Mm-hmm. At that time, were you carrying an active caseload?
No, I was not. I was area supervisor of adoptions and child care services, mainly responsible for permanent wards. The temporary wards are dealt by the geographic social worker, who did generic work based on the geographic area where they worked.
When had that move toward generic social work in the districts come about?
It came about 1971, when we had the region was formed, and the director revised the internal systems and implemented this program.
As a person who was supervising other workers, and I'm not speaking of individual personalities here, did you find at that time that social workers were prepared adequately to do generic social work?
I can't answer this generic, but I can answer it from my own unit. We had only very few qualified social workers. The majority of workers are young workers with Bachelor of Arts degree mainly, and they had to be trained or helped to do the work.
How did you work with people who had no background in social work? What kinds of things would you think were most important to get across to them?
First, there were some provincial government policies and guidelines and standards and all this, and legislation, you prepare the worker to read these and then discuss and all this, and then day-to-day basis too. And the supervisory sessions are usually used too, part of the supervisory session, just for education purposes too.
Mm-hmm. Did you make an effort to discuss social work principles and ethics with those people who were in training?
Principles are almost outlined in our provincial guidelines and policies too. Professional ethics, international professional ethics, I have always framed on my wall for my own use too, just to keep me reminding, and sometimes in group discussions, we did discuss, principles in group sessions. We had once a week group meeting. Adoption meeting was once a week. And so was childcare people met too once a week as a group. And whatever questions and issues is raised were discussed. And the department gave generally a lot of in-service training internally. And the principles came out there too. I conducted with somebody else in-service training on 4 protection topics and 1 foster home evaluation and adoption evaluation. The principles always come out there and the basic issues come out.
In your mind, what does the professionally trained social worker bring to child welfare that a good intentioned but not professionally trained worker might have?
First, I still feel that the ethics are important, but the diagnostic skills, in-depth approach, and just to try to understand this human being, the person, as a total person in a total environment, not as a person with one problem, let's say, but what contributes to this particular situation and problem.
That brings me to the issue of professionalization and unionization in social services. I don't know what was happening in New Brunswick during that period of time, say 1953 to 1980. Are social workers members of unions here?
Yes.
How did that process develop, and how were you involved in it?
It's an organization that protects the workers' interest and the bargaining agent and whatever other roles they have. And the workers select their own union, I believe, which one they want to belong. And you just belong to this union. Your classification indicates that you have to belong, or your job description that you belong to this union. And I have not been too active in the union matters because I was always so busy with my work, and other things. But it can be also a complicated issue too for professional social worker regarding the ethics issue. Who gives you guidelines? Your employer issue. where you have your loyalties from whom you take the orders. And if you have a problem, some ethic problem, who tells you what's right to do and what not right to do?
Mm-hmm. A situation that I'm familiar with, perhaps you'd make some comments on, is where a company, an industry, hired social workers to counsel clients who were having problems, family problems, addiction problems, or problems with their children or whatever. And the union told its employees not to talk to those social workers because the professionally trained social workers would tell the employers, and the employers would use that information against the employee, the union member. Can you see, what do you think about that kind of situation? And if you were a social worker, and if you were that social worker, what would you do?
I think every counseling session is confidential to start out. This is, but if there's some information has to be shared with the employer, then the employee should know about it and give his or her permission to share it with the. I can see the problem can be solved this way, but if the employee doesn't want counseling sessions, then the employee should not be forced either, But the employer should be able to make a decision then, whether the employee is satisfactory or not satisfactory with the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's not so cut and dry, issue either. There should be, every counseling session, whatever information you share with two people is confidential unless you're subpoenaed to court and have to tell something,
Mm-hmm.
But it's between counseling sessions are confidential.
So that's a principle which, as a social worker, you hold to be...
Same as with a social histories, what I write to the court. I have written them many. When you present your case to court, you share this information with the client. You have to give this to read to the client before. If you tell us, about the problems there, your client has to know what you're telling the court. You can't hide that.
Mm-hmm.
I regard it same, but the client knows about it. You share it with the client.
Mm-hmm. And
these are the factual. You don't describe the people's personality so much, but what transpired.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The factual information, what you share with the court.
In the first situation that I mentioned, if you were the social worker and the employer required that you disclose that information, what kind of a situation would you find yourself in?
I could say, look, I have to ask my client's permission to share it with you.
Yeah, and
that's Information Act 2 now, isn't it? You have to apply. You can't disclose anything without the person's permission from the file. You would have a file on this client, and the client would have access to the file. You know what you write about the client.
Under the Federal Freedom of Information?
I think so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know about that. Oh.
I'm quite sure.
Yeah.
And you can't give out with the client's permission anything from the file, even the address to certain party.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about
which is not in the client's best interest. If you feel it's in the client's very best interest, then you probably can disclose the address. But you feel it's not the client's best interest.
I'm thinking about the interplay between the employer, the social worker, the union, and the client. It seems that the social worker is in the middle there.
Yeah. But it shouldn't be this way. I mean, the four parties better get together and discuss it, to have it. But I can't see why the employer wants so much personal information like from counseling sessions, because employer has to evaluate the employee from the productivity point of view, or whatever the requirements are, or the output point of view. And if there is something lacking, then the employer could discuss with the employee directly without going through the social worker, learn directly from the employee, if the employee wants to, disclose herself. Social work is still a counselor role in these situations, I believe, to help the client to overcome the problems that hinder the satisfactory employment or employability.
If I can be more personal then for a moment, if one is an employee of a provincial, of a government, in whose interest do you work? You're paid by the provincial government to do such a job, and you have a number of people to whom you provide various kinds of services. And yet your livelihood is dependent on, of course, your employer.
This is really needs a Solomon's answer. I just, it is a very complex issue. It can become in some situation, and somebody better figure it out here, how to handle this. He is a professional social worker, torn between the devil and the deep blue sea sometimes, could be torn, between the professional association, which has set the ethics, professional ethics, employer, who has own point of view, whose orders you have to take to carry out this task, what might not be within the, standards how you interpret it. And there is a union too, who is also involved in the issue. If you have a appeal or something you need to have their advice or the backing. That's really a very complex issue, and the sooner it's resolved, the better for everybody.
Yeah, I appreciated the way that you phrased your response. We need Solomon's wisdom on that.
Where your loyalties, who is, standards, ethics, orders. Who pays your money? Your employer, your livelihood is dependent on the employer.
I wonder if I might ask you a related question about the role of the social worker in improving or changing social conditions. If a social worker sees a situation in their own workplace or in the community that she feels strongly needs to be improved, what kind of social change responsibility do you think social workers should take?
I feel that it's still social workers' responsibility to bring it to somebody's attention, whatever your system allows, which bureaucracy ladder you have to go through. But this is still the social worker's responsibility, because somebody has to be the advocate of a client. And sometimes social work is maybe the closest to the scene or most neutral observer in a situation, and is maybe the most reliable information to bring it to somebody's attention. There is a various channels, you probably let your supervisor know, and then you get together with your director, whatever action director. But I feel some action is justified in some of the situations. For instance, just one example, when I was in child protection in the 50s, there in winter time, some houses, water froze in the houses. It's a housing matter. But the family with 8 children can't live much beyond 3 days without water in the house. So the children have to be placed somewhere. The landlord would not repair it or put it in. So there is nobody, to speak out to the client that children had to be separated from the family due to these frozen pipes. And if we believe that the family should be kept together, these external matters, the frozen pipe, should not be a reason for separate the family for a month or 6 weeks whenever the pipes get unfrozen again. Over there. So authorities somewhere other authorities have to get together and see what can be done to improve, either locate a new housing for this particular family whose children have been boarded out, or enforce the landlord to, repair it, or whatever is best under the circumstances and the most appropriate under the circumstances. But the families, children should not be separated.
Do you see social workers as having a role in larger issues? Not that that's a small issue, but I know that in New Brunswick the anti-nuclear movement has been quite strong over the years. Do you see social workers as having a role in that sort of worldwide kind of social change activity?
These issues, as everybody's issues, not only social work profession issues, that other people should be involved too with these issues. I think, we all have to make some contribution to the worldwide issues too. And in proportionally speaking, yes, we should have some contribution made or participation in that.
Another issue that I know that's been important and perhaps relates to you closely because of your work is the issue of children's rights. The right of children to representation, to due process, and in child protection matters, I suppose. Is that something that has affected you during the years that you've worked in child welfare?
Yes. The attitude is how the people interpreted the existing laws, and where they put the more emphasis. Do they put who are dealing with the existing child welfare laws? Do they emphasize more the parental rights or equally child's rights too? And I'm really glad to see that the children's rights, and as defined, generally through the international, codes, will be more emphasized in our legislation. We just got the new act in new province, and there is the best interest of the child is now more or less defined to what's in the best interest of the child under our new Child Family Services Act. So I'm glad that the day has moved in that direction now.
So New Brunswick has brand new legislation?
A few years ago, yeah.
Yeah. And is the best interest of the child defined?
Yes.
Do you have a recollection of some of the things that's contained?
Yes, there is. I just don't have an act and right, but I can supply you later with this.
I was just wondering what kinds of things they were considering as in the best interest, I suppose.
Continuous relationship. And I just don't at this moment, but I supply you with this act.
Yeah, I was thinking that some of the ideas that have come through in our conversation probably would be reflected the idea of permanency planning, for example, which is certainly continuous relationship, that kind of thing. Yeah. Were you at all involved in the development of that new act?
Indirectly. I was more involved with the Adoption Act. I was on the provincial committee going to Fredericton, and with his members we emphasize the high points or the lights, what we'd like to see in act.
Mm-hmm.
But with the child protection, I couldn't carry two committee work. I took only one committee work.
No, committee work is heavy duty stuff.
I was asked to, but I couldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't spare so much time to go to Fredericton that frequently.
Yeah. What happened with the Adoption Act? Well,
it's all incorporated now too in new legislation, and it has been changes.
For the better?
I would say so. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I seem to sense a bit of reluctance there, that maybe it's
a little bit vague in some parts yet, but it's that's really a good change. That if you had a child and from the previous associations, and you marry or remarry, and your new spouse wants to adopt, so you don't need to go through the department. You just go directly to the court and apply. Mm-hmm. That is really a much more sensible way of doing it, that to have your home studies done, your child has been, you already accepted the child when you married the partner. Mm-hmm. And there are some other changes too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Over the years, have you had involvement with other organizations in the city or provincially? Other community agencies or other boards?
Yes, I was from 53 until early 70s quite active with a community workers association, which met once a month, except summer months, at the supper meeting, and we had a little program and got acquainted with each other and socialization there. Mm-hmm. And we learned from each other about each other's work, and just got people to know who work in the other organizations. I found it there was nurses and probation officers and teachers and the Salvation Army and church people, whoever is working with the people in the community, and that was very good to know the mm-hmm. people. Mm-hmm. But it didn't anymore function because the membership fell down.
So it died away, the organization?
Yeah. And I've also been involved with the Civil Liberties Association, but this organization is rather new and small here in St. John.
What issue did they organize around?
Oh, wherever the issues are around civil liberty matters.
Have there been matters of controversy here that have meant that there was a need for an organization like that?
No, it's sort of watchdog role here.
Mm-hmm.
If mm-hmm. somebody in the community has a issue, can come and refer their matters, and that will be dealt with. It's in numbers, it's a very small organization, mm-hmm. but it's sort of a branch of the Canadian Civil Liberties mm-hmm. Association.
Do you anticipate that they might have any interest in the work of the Department of Social Services?
I doubt very much. I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned earlier that when you first came to St. John, you were you quite enjoyed your involvement with the Association of Social Workers. Did you continue your involvement with them over the years?
Yes, I have continued, but we had this decentralization when we established New Brunswick Association of Social Workers, or several provinces did, and the meetings were then on an area basis, and I missed the cohesiveness of the organization. Mm-hmm. Only once a year, an annual meeting, you you meet all the group, but it's not as interlocking or cohesive as if you meet provincially 4 or 5 times a year.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you had like a St. John district meetings then?
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. That's my personal point of view.
Sure.
Yeah.
I wonder if I could ask you what you feel about your accomplishments during the years that you've been in social work. Any things that you're particularly pleased about that you've done?
When I was in school, in social work, we sort of talked about it, which area of specialization each one would like to go. And I chose child welfare, and I'm really pleased that I was able to practice it and finish my, develop speciality in child welfare. My job satisfaction came from protection work dealing with clients, and even the clients that you had to take the children away from are still some patting me on the shoulder, and I want to walk in the middle of town and remember my name so clearly as a bell. That means that there is something still between the two people that taken place, that is still one remembers it. So many mothers who have tapped me on the shoulder, and some men have even called me across the street loud and clear. How are you, Mrs. Kurol? You're getting old now, aren't you? You still working or what? My job satisfaction came also that I really conscientiously did my best to be the child's advocate in the protection, because I am the only one there on the scene who knows what's transpired there, whether the child is scapegoated or abused or just not wanted. That I tried always to diagnose what is the situation and try to be the advocate for this child, what's best for this child. Later on, in other roles, consultant role or supervisor role, to see that some permanency is placed in these children's lives who have been uprooted, who have gone from foster home to foster home in some situations, that if their own natural parents fail them, then the state will find alternative placement to the best of the state's ability and facilities. I have not been as close to the clients anymore, but being a planner and part of the team's decision maker, that we have, I'm satisfied that we have done our best to find parents and homes for the children who have been entrusted to our care. I have also enjoyed the very deep commitment by other colleagues who are really being child welfare oriented, and these are the very satisfying memories and experience that there is people our staff who is concerned about the work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's about all.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if, again, taking a long-term perspective, what do you see as the most significant changes that have happened over the period of time that you were in social work?
I see the changes in for the better. The social assistance programs have improved so tremendous. It's like a day and night. You can't compare it anymore, in spite of our restraint programs and whatnot. I've seen changes in more uniformity in providing service. I've seen the changes in decision making, which is more group decisions, or what I call it also democratic decisions. It's not made anymore by one person, but there is 2 or 3 people involved in a group, because if we are dealing with other people's lives, especially children for whom we have to make decisions, then I still feel that group decision is still better than one individual person's decision. I still, in proportion, I think the professional staff has increased, which is also as to the quality of service. And the people who are dealing with people have to have all their abilities and capabilities and knowledge in order to give a proper service to the people.
Mm-hmm.
Also the laws, the change of laws, more comprehensive approach to the total family matter has been helpful to us social workers.
Mm-hmm. Do you see that there have been any changes for the worse? Perhaps I could phrase the question a different way and see what your comments would be on this. Some years ago, the provincial government took over children's aid societies and private agency involvement in child welfare. If they asked your opinion on that today, what would you say is the role, should be the role of private agencies in child welfare?
I still feel that the child welfare is a state responsibility. There will be more uniformity, more money is available to meet the needs of the children and families. Money is also needed for very much preventative work. Money alone doesn't solve the problem, but it is a helpful tool. Services might get at times too impersonal because so many people are involved. Frequent change of staff, frequent system changes. I still feel that the client is better served when there is doesn't need to go through so many staff members for different needs in the programs. Staff itself gets also, when it's big organization, staff is not so personal anymore. It gets more impersonal too. And but these are the things where when you're concerned about it, you can take also the corrective measures and avoid these things. If each department gives own standards and own guidelines, and they might not always, interlock with each other too, and then one is confused too, which it can happen.
Something that occurs to me about that, I guess, relates to a question that I asked you earlier, and perhaps I can rephrase it again in this context. If social workers had been involved in planning and reorganizing government departments, might things be different in government departments than they are now?
The input from every level is necessary. That's good. This is administration principles.
Okay.
Lateral and otherwise, So I think it should be.
Okay. Excuse me. Just as a final question, I wonder if I could ask you, if you were starting over again, if you were going to go out tomorrow and start out as a social worker fresh out of school, knowing, though, what you know now, where would you start? What is the job that needs to be done that you think social workers can do?
First of all, if I start all over again, I would have my second thought whether I would go to school of social work to start out. Because somehow social workers have not got this recognition what they really deserve. Mm-hmm. I think the job accountability, responsibilities is really very heavy. But somehow they haven't got the recognition through whatever scale you get recognition. But if I start again, I would still maybe more emphasize prevention. And prevention in early stages too. Because from that day one, when somebody is born, the environmental or whatever problems start to come. If somebody is already excluded from school in grade 6, you can see as clear as a handwriting where this boy and girl will land one day, because excluded from school. Mm-hmm. It's only a miracle that saves it somewhere, mm-hmm. from maladjustments later on in life, either personal maladjustment or societal maladjustments.
Mm-hmm. So prevention would be something?
Yes, I would recommend really that more attention be given on the preventative programs.
Mm-hmm. Is there any advice that you would give to people who are just starting out?
Whatever you do in this life, if you do something, do it well. Don't do it half-hearted. Don't do it at all if you don't do it well. That's what my mother told me. Leave it undone or completely. If you become social worker, then you have to be, interested and have some dedication or commitment in spite of all kinds of disappointments and dissatisfactions. But if you need a good mental health too, mm-hmm. because this life is never easy, and we are in the middle of a life when we are social workers. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if, in closing, if there's anything that you'd like to add, anything you wish you would have said and didn't have a chance to say, or anything I should have asked you and didn't?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Only thing I would add is that regardless where you practice social work, people are still in Western countries more or less the same problems. So the institutions vary, your legislation varies, but but the problems and contributing factors don't vary that much. Your culture factor is there. You know, the different cultures handle different problems. But basically, the human beings are all the same, and they don't vary from country to country that much. I've practiced only in 3 countries, but I haven't seen much difference that much at all in contributing factors towards your personal problems. External problems might be different, but internal problems are more or less the same.
Would you say then that your, not you specifically, but our social work training, wherever we have done it, would stand us well in any of the Western countries?
I would think so. I don't know the school program so much, but I have worked with the young graduates when they come up, and I would so, yeah.
Well, that's reassuring. There's a
and vice versa, you shouldn't be so afraid of the so-called offshore training people either, you know.
Yes.
Lots of things are different, yes. Institution, legislation, procedures, and your patents, you know, that some countries have such a good program in one area and other countries don't have this program, and that creates, you know, sometimes a little bit problems, but still the people are same.
Well, with that, perhaps we could close, and I'd like to say thank you very much for spending time with me this afternoon. I have very much enjoyed it and found it a very informative experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I joined this interview too than I anticipated first.